and welcome to our special program on Boao Forum for Asia. I'm Tian Wei. Leaders from 60 countries and regions share their thoughts on a changing world at the opening ceremony of Boao Forum for Asia Tuesday. Chinese President Xi Jinping highlighted the need for better global governance and the future of the Belt and Road Initiative.
As an important member of the Asian family, China has kept deepening reform and opening up while promoting regional cooperation, thus achieving progress and development in tandem with the rest of Asia and the world. Attempts to erect walls or decouple run counter to the law of economics and market principles. They would hurt others' interests without benefiting oneself. I have said on various occasions that the Belt and Road Initiative is a public road open to all, not a private path owned by one single party. All interested countries are welcome to take part and share its benefits.
That's President Xi Jinping from China. Amid deep polarization and protectionism, how can the world keep the multilateral trading system? And with the worsening pandemic, big questions remain. Huge gaps in vaccine production and distribution are not helping. With the trickle of vaccines going to the most vulnerable nations, the imbalance is high on the agenda of the World Trade Organization. In a recent meeting, WTO Director-General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala made it clear the WTO wants to do its part amid the crisis. I had an inclusive interview with her during this year's Boao Forum, in which she shared climate action plans and how active WTO members such as China can do their parts against climate change in this global trade recovery. But most importantly, the WTO reform plan. Take a look. Madam Director General, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity to help us understand better about the situations and realities of trade at this time when they're still in the middle of the pandemic.
In 2021, we're looking and we see a 5.3% contraction in trade, much better than we expected because of quicker recovery in some parts of the world, like China, in Asia, and so on. And this year, we're forecasting an 8% growth in trade, falling to 4% in 2022. So I think things are looking up, but all this is happening in a very uncertain environment, which very much depends on whether there's access to vaccines or not. So there are some downside risks to the projections to consider. If vaccine inequity continues and we don't get the rest of the world vaccinated, then we may not see the bounce back that we're expecting. Even now, there's a divergence. I think China and Asia is recovering much faster with regard to exports and imports than, say, Latin America and Africa.
What is the cure for the unequal access to vaccines among various countries, especially developing countries? Without them having the vaccines, situations are not likely to get better.
Well, let me say this, that, I've said that vaccine policy is the best, access to vaccines is the best economic stimulus one can have. And vaccine policy is the same as growth and recovery policy. So we're basically saying that this is so important that we have to do all that is necessary to make vaccines available, especially to poor countries who are not having access. A situation where about 10 countries have administered, 70 to 80% of the vaccine doses we have in the world, where low-income countries have only seen 0.2% of the vaccines. This is not really acceptable, and we have to do something about it. And there are several ways. One of the things is that this situation is coming out of tremendous scarcity of supply globally. There's not enough supply, so countries are bidding against one another. There's no real transparency about contracts and how they're being delivered. And this is causing a problem. The mechanism that the world had set up, which I also worked on, COVAX, to deliver vaccines to poor countries, although they've now started functioning very well and have reached almost the 92 countries, poor countries they set out, they are not getting enough quantities to deliver. So we must scale up the manufacturing of vaccines worldwide. We must have a better distribution of manufacturing capacity. There's also the demand by almost 100 members of WTO in the TRIPS Council to have a waiver of the TRIPS agreement, so that intellectual property agreement, so that developing countries can have access. Now, this is being debated. So you have both sides. And I believe that our members, in discussing with each other, will come to an acceptable agreement to both sides that would enable us to have this solution of equity of access solved, whilst also protecting research and development.
Really? Are they really going to come to an agreement? That has been debated for years, and that has also been led to trade controversies and lawsuits. Will they be able to handle it this time?
Well, there was some agreement that led to the present TRIPS clause that we have and the present flexibilities that are there, that are being debated. So there must have been agreement to reach that. So if they could reach agreement on that, they can reach agreement on a new way to go about it. So I think we should give them a chance to work this out.
Madam Director General, you are coming into the office as one of the most challenging times in WTO history. And many issues that has been long there and not solved now are facing you all at the same time. What is the priority? Where to begin with? You talk about vaccine, but that's not necessarily going to be your work for the long time when it comes to the nature of WTO. So what is the real beginning point do you see?
Well, the beginning point for us, for the WTO, is helping to solve the problems that the world is facing at this time. And right now, the world is facing a problem of a pandemic. And the WTO has a role to play in two ways. One, the issue of export restrictions and prohibitions that may hinder the supply chain. As you know, the supply chain for vaccines is very complicated. Secondly, the issue of helping to increase access and volume is also, as you noted earlier, within the ambit of the WTO. So we should contribute to that. So that, to me, is a top priority where the organization can make a difference. I think next is the fisheries subsidies negotiation, which speaks to helping with the sustainability of our oceans and our fish stocks. SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 14.6. This negotiation has been going on for 20 years, and it is time to deliver. I've said 20 years is enough. So WTO members have to deliver this year in order to support the sustainable development goals. So those are three areas. In addition to all that, I think we must also look to some new areas. Inclusion. Trade the multilateral trading system has lifted so many up. And you can see, and it has helped to take many out of poverty. China is a shining example of this. So the issue is some have been left behind within countries, some between countries. How can we now try to use trade to include those who have been left behind, women in particular, micro, medium, and small enterprises? So this is another priority. And lastly, digital. The digital economy is there. It's booming during this pandemic, and we must have the WTO rules updated. We have trade and climate issues. And also the dispute settlement system that has to be reformed and rejuvenated. So these are the 5 or so priorities that are important to us at the WTO.
Now, the decision-making process as a result of this is extremely crucial. How do you make sure, Madam Director General, given the rules of WTO for years, the inclusiveness will really be the principle when it comes to designing all these latest rules?
Well, I mean, that's why we have to change at the WTO. Whatever it is that has been happening in the past, it cannot be business as usual. That's what I've said. The world is changing before, so all WTO members also have to change. They have to adopt processes that will enable them to do things differently. And I'm hoping that one of these is the principle of inclusion. And since I've been here, it's only 3 weeks, I have seen that happening, that there's a willingness to cooperate, there's a willingness to make sure that people are included, all are included in the discussions. Yeah. We're seeing it happening in the fisheries negotiations. I also think that in the greening of our economies going forward, we must be mindful of a just transition. In other words, poorer countries will need considerable time in which to adjust and to make the required movement to renewables, to decarbonization. And, you know, many countries are saying they'll be net zero by 2050, which is wonderful. China has declared 2060. We have to look at what other developing countries, poor countries can do, and what time we need, and what financing they will need to make this happen. Right.
Let me ask you more about the WTO. The appellate body is supposed to be the teeth of the WTO, but we see little progress in figuring out who will be the judges, and not to mention they will back to work. What to do? Will WTO still be able to maintain its capability?
The WTO has to work on the reform of the dispute settlement system. I think all WTO members are clear about this. I think the issue is what should be the nature of these reforms. And on that, WTO members still need to come to agreement. So these are some of the discussions that will be initiated. There are developing countries who have issues with the way the present dispute settlement system works. There are developed countries like the United States who have problems with the way it works. We have to factor all this into account and come to a common understanding of what type of reforms we want. I hope that by the time of the 12th Ministerial Conference in December, we will at least be on the same playing field, level playing field, with respect to how do we want to reform the system. We need it to be reformed in order to make sure that the rulemaking of the WTO still has the credibility it deserves.
But Madam Director General, I know you know it very well. You have to deal with it. You know, the geopolitics to China and the United States, the complicated relations between the trade relations between the EU, US, and China, for example, are only some of those issues you have to face every day in order to find a solution to many of the things you just said. So is there a hope? Many say this transformation will take years.
Well, the WTO can, as a multilateral institution, can certainly help our members like the EU, the US, and China to solve some of the problems they have. And I hope they will indeed use this organization, reform it, and use it towards this end, because that's why it's here. But there are also some issues that need to be solved bilaterally between these big trading powers. And there is an indication from the Biden administration and the EU, for instance, that they might be willing to sit together and try to find a negotiated solution or a mediation in the matters that have confronted them on the airline, the Airbus and Boeing dispute, for instance, that has gone on for many years. Similarly, I hope that China and the US can also find a way to settle some of their differences, you know, bilaterally. But any remaining differences, the WTO is ready to be able to help members use it as a forum to arrive at some good solutions.
Also, you are being elected into the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Many hope, as someone originally coming from a developing country, will make the developing country onto the map clearly. Of course, that's also the role of the Director General anyway. On that point, how do you think you'll be able to carry out that expectation?
Well, as I'm elected as a WTO DG, I'm the WTO DG for all members. And my job is to support the membership to come to good agreements. I'm also from a developing country, and I've lived in a developed country for a long period of my life. So I bring the two perspectives together, and I hope that that can help us serve the entire membership. I've been able, for instance, to explain to some developed country members the perspectives of developing countries on some issues, and I think they've received this well. At the same time, I've been able to talk to some developing country members to explain the viewpoints of the developed. This is what is needed to bring trust. There's lack of trust among members at the WTO, yes. And we need to repair that. So by looking at the points of views of both sides, I think we can build trust and then be able to move the organization forward to make good decisions.
Serving on one of the most important multilateral platforms of our world today, Madam Director General, what is your view about the updates that we need to do of global governance today?
Well, I think that the pandemic has shown that global governance is very important and that interdependence is evident for everyone. Therefore, global solidarity is key, and the multilateralism is very important because we cannot solve some of the problems of the global commons like pandemics and climate change without multilateralism. So we need to strengthen multilateralism. We need strong global governance to coexist in a planet that has all these problems and all these uncertainties.
Would there be updates?
Well, I hope that the global governance system, yes, needs to be made fit for purpose. We have to look at our global institutions and see whether they are fit for purpose. That is why the WTO are making it a priority for us, not only to deliver results this year, but also to see the structure of the organization and the values and behaviors. We are going to take an independent look at that to see, are we fit for purpose? Do we need to be strengthened as an organization in order to keep delivering for the multilateral trading system? So we are part of global governance.
Last question for you, Madam Director General. What about women leadership? We see one after another, including that of yours, coming onto the world stage. Will you be able to bring some different momentum into the decision-making process? What would that be?
Well, it's good to see women leaders, and many of them, according to the information we have performed well during this pandemic. People often cite Erna Solberg of Norway, Jacinda Ardern, Angela Merkel, as to the way they've handled the pandemic throughout the course of it. And then we see women leaders. You've mentioned them, Kristalina at the IMF, Christine Lagarde at the European Central Bank, etc. So we are beginning to see women leaders take charge and run organizations. And I think women leaders should be judged on their performance. They were elected not because they were women, but because they are professionally, they know what they are doing. I think that's why they got the job. Nevertheless, we shouldn't get overly excited. You know, women are still maybe 21% or so of parliamentarians, cabinets, everywhere you go, female leaders, female heads of state are not very many. So one could go on and on. So I think we need to continue to push. So yes, things are moving, but we have a long way to go. Let me tell you, the day that we will say that women's leadership has arrived is the day that we will no longer find it special that a woman is in an international organization, that an African is leading. The day we don't have that as a big piece of excitement, that will tell you that women have really arrived. The fact that people are so excited that a woman and an African is leading an organization shows you that we're not there yet. We have to now deliver for younger women so that they can take their rightful place in these organizations.
Rightly said. Beautifully said. As the Chinese saying goes also, women holding half of the sky, as it should be. Thank you so much, Madam Director General, to see you once again and hope to keep in touch. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tianwei, very much. Thank you.